when a widowed saloon musician in 1867 Dakota Territory discovers two orphan twins singing in an alley. Their angelic voices transform his broken heart and soon captivate an entire frontier town. But when a ruthless showman arrives with legal papers to tear the newfound family apart, their final performance will determine whether love and community can triumph over law and greed can. Three voices singing in perfect harmony silence a room full of hardened miners and save a family from being destroyed forever. The scream of a dying horse echoed through Deadwood Gulch as Jacob Harrison's fiddle bow scraped against broken strings, the sound mixing with gunshots from the street outside the Rusty Nail Saloon. It was October 15th, 1867, in Dakota Territory, and death seemed to follow him everywhere he went. Jacob's hands shook as he tried to fix the snapped string, his fingers still stained with dirt from his wife's grave. 3 months had passed since Margaret died from the lung sickness, but the pain felt fresh as a knife wound. The saloon around him buzzed with miners, cowboys, and travelers, all trying to forget their troubles with whiskey and card games. "Play something happy, Harrison," shouted Pete Garrison, the saloon owner, from behind the bar. His thick mustache twitched with annoyance. These folks didn't come here to cry in their drinks. Jacob nodded but couldn't find any happy songs in his heart. Everything reminded him of Margaret, the way she used to hum while cooking, how she'd dance when he played her favorite tunes. Now his music sounded hollow, like an echo in an empty cave. The saloon door swung open with a bang, letting in a blast of cold air and two dusty cowboys. They stomped their boots and looked around with hungry eyes, the kind of men who brought trouble wherever they went. Jacob had seen their type before, drifters with nothing to lose and everything to prove. "What kind of music you call that?" one of them sneered, pointing at Jacob's fiddle. "Sounds like a cat caught in a trap." Pete stepped forward, his hand moving to the shotgun under the bar. "The music's fine. Order a drink or move along." But Jacob was already packing up his fiddle. He couldn't face another night of pretending to be cheerful when his world had crumbled. The cowboys laughed as he headed for the back door, their cruel voices following him into the alley. The night air hit him like a slap. Stars scattered across the sky like spilled salt, and the moon cast long shadows between the buildings. Jacob leaned against the saloon's back wall, breathing hard. Sometimes he wondered if it might be easier to just disappear into the wilderness, let the wolves and bears finish what grief had started. That's when he heard it voices, singing somewhere in the darkness. The sound was so pure, so unexpected, that Jacob thought he might be dreaming. Two young voices blended together in perfect harmony, singing a hymn his grandmother had taught him years ago. The melody floated through the alley like something magical, washing away the harsh sounds of the saloon. Jacob followed the voices, his heart pounding. Behind a pile of empty barrels, he saw two small figures huddled together against the cold. They were children girls, maybe 8 or 9 years old, sharing a thin blanket that had more holes than fabric. Their faces were dirty, their clothes patched and worn, but their voices were like angels. The girls stopped singing when they noticed him watching. They pressed closer together, fear flashing in their eyes. Jacob realized how he must look a strange man stepping out of the shadows, probably smelling of whiskey and tobacco. "Please, don't stop," he said softly, raising his hands to show he meant no harm. "That was the most beautiful thing I've heard in months." The taller girler, maybe she just seemed taller because she sat up straighter, spoke first. "We weren't bothering nobody, mister. We'll move along if you want." "No," Jacob said quickly. "I'm not asking you to leave. I'm asking where you learned to sing like that." The girls exchanged glances, having one of those silent conversations that twins often share. The shorter one had a small scar above her right eyebrow, the only way Jacob could tell them apart in the moonlight. "Our mama taught us," the girl with the scar whispered, "before she got sick and went to heaven." Jacob's chest tightened. He knew that pain, the hollow ache of losing someone who meant everything. "What are your names?" "I'm Emma," said the girl with the scar. "This is Lily. We're just passing through." But Jacob could see they weren't just passing through. They were surviving, day by day, with nothing but each other and the songs their mother had left them. Their clothes were too thin for the cold nights, their faces too thin from not enough food. "Where are you staying?" he asked. Emma's chin lifted with pride that broke his heart. "We take care of ourselves." Jacob understood that pride. He'd felt it himself after Margaret died, when well-meaning neighbors tried to help, and he'd insisted he was fine. But these were children, and winter was coming fast to Dakota Territory. "I play music at the Saloon," he said, pointing back toward the rusty nail. "I could use some help backup singers for my performances. It would mean food and a warm place to sleep." The girls looked at each other again, hope and fear warring in their expressions. They'd probably been disappointed by adults before, promised things that never came true. "Why would you want to help us?" Lily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jacob thought of Margaret, of the children they'd planned to have, of the empty house that echoed with loneliness. "Because," he said, "I think we might be able to help each other." A dog barked somewhere in the distance, and footsteps echoed from the main street. The girls tensed, ready to run at the first sign of trouble. Jacob realized he was at a crossroads. He could walk away, go back to his empty house and his hollow music, or he could try to save these two lost souls and maybe save himself in the process. "Think about it," he said, backing toward the saloon. "I'll be here tomorrow night if you change your minds." As he walked away, he heard them start singing again, their voices mixing with the night wind. For the first time in months, Jacob felt something stirring in his chest that might have been hope. The next morning brought news that would change everything, though Jacob didn't know it yet as he sat in Miller's general store, watching the two girls through the dusty window. Emma and Lily sat on the store's front steps, sharing what looked like their only meal, a piece of bread so old it could have been used as a hammer, and an apple with brown spots covering half its surface. They ate slowly, making it last, while people walked past them like they were invisible. Jacob had been thinking about them all night, lying awake in his empty bed, listening to the wind rattle his windows. Something about their voices had reached into the cold place where his heart used to be and lit a tiny flame. He hadn't felt anything like it since Margaret died. "Those girls been sitting there since sunrise," said Mrs. Henderson, the store owner's wife. She was a thin woman with kind eyes and worry lines around her mouth. "Makes me sad to see children on their own like that." "Where did they come from?" Jacob asked, pretending to examine a bag of flour. "Train dropped them off 3 days ago. Conductor said they had tickets to Rapid City, but I think they got off early. Probably ran out of money." Mrs. Henderson shook her head. "I offered them some work sweeping the store, but they're too proud to take charity." Jacob understood that pride. After Margaret died, half the town had tried to help him, bringing food and offering to clean his house. He'd turned them all away, determined to prove he could manage alone. But these were children, and pride was a luxury they couldn't afford. He bought some supplies: bread, cheese, apples that weren't half rotten, a small jar of jam, and walked outside. The girls looked up when his shadow fell across them, their faces showing the same mixture of hope and caution he'd seen the night before. "Good morning," he said, sitting down on the steps beside them. "I brought breakfast." Emma's eyes narrowed. "We don't take handouts." "It's not a handout," Jacob replied, unwrapping the bread. "It's a business meeting. I want to talk about my offer from last night." Lily's stomach growled loud enough to hear from the street. Emma shot her a warning look, but Jacob pretended not to notice. "I've been thinking about what you said about your mama teaching you to sing." He spread jam on a piece of bread and offered it to Lily. "My wife used to sing too. She had a voice that could make grown men cry." Lily took the bread with shaking hands. "What happened to her?" "She got sick. Same as your mama, I think." Jacob felt the familiar ache in his chest. "But before she died, she made me promise something. She said music was a gift, and gifts were meant to be shared." Emma remained suspicious, but she accepted food when Jacob offered it. "What kind of sharing?" "The kind that puts food in your belly and a roof over your head." Jacob pulled out his fiddle, running his fingers over the smooth wood. "I play every night at the Rusty Nail. The pay isn't much, but it's honest work. With 2 singers backing me up, we could earn enough to rent a small house." "A house?" Lily's voice cracked with longing. "Just a small one. 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, maybe a parlor where we could practice." Jacob began tuning his fiddle. "What do you think? Want to try a song together?" Emma and Lily looked at each other, having another of their silent conversations. Finally, Emma nodded. "What song?" Jacob started playing Home Sweet Home, a melody every person in America knew by heart. His fingers found the familiar notes, and slowly, tentatively, the girls began to sing. Their voices were even more beautiful in daylight. Emma had a strong, clear tone that could carry over any crowd, while Lily's voice was softer, adding layers of harmony that made the simple song sound like something from heaven. Together, they created magic. People walking by began to slow down, then stop completely. A woman with a baby in her arms paused on the sidewalk, swaying gently to the music. Two cowboys tied their horses to the hitching post just to listen. Even the dogs seemed to quiet down. When the song ended, the small crowd burst into applause. Someone tossed a coin onto the steps, then another. Before long, a small pile of money had accumulated at the girls' feet. "Well, I'll be," said Mrs. Henderson, who had come outside to listen. "You three should be on the stage in Denver, not playing on street corners." Emma stared at the coins like they might disappear. "People really liked it?" "Liked it?" Mrs. Henderson laughed. "Honey, you just made old Pete Morrison cry, and that man hasn't shown emotion since his horse died 5 years ago." Jacob felt something loosening in his chest, like a knot finally coming undone. For the first time since Margaret's death, he'd played music that felt alive instead of hollow. The girls had given him something he'd lost the joy of making music with others. "So," he said, pocketing the coins, "what do you say? Want to try this partnership?" Emma looked at Lily, then back at Jacob. "What would we call ourselves?" "How about the Deadwood Singers?" Jacob suggested. "That sounds like we're dead," Lily giggled. "The Prairie Voices?" Emma tried. "The Dakota Harmonies," Jacob said, and somehow it felt right. "The Dakota Harmonies," Emma repeated, testing the words. "I like it." "Me too," Lily agreed. Jacob stood up, feeling younger than he had in months. "Then let's go find that house. We've got work to do." As they walked down the dusty street, Jacob noticed how the girls stayed close to him, like chicks following a rooster. They were still wary, still ready to run if things went wrong, but they were willing to trust him with their hopes. He thought about Margaret, about the family they'd never had, about the empty house that had felt like a tomb. Maybe this wasn't the family he'd planned, but it was the family he'd been given. And sometimes, the best gifts came in packages you never expected. Behind them, Mrs. Henderson smiled and went back into her store, already planning to tell everyone about the wonderful music she'd heard that morning. Word would spread fast in a small town like Deadwood Gulch, and by evening, half the territory would know about the man with the fiddle and the two singing girls who might just be angels in disguise. But Jacob didn't know about the stranger who had been watching from across the street, a well-dressed man with calculating eyes who had heard every note of their performance. The man who would soon change everything for the Dakota Harmonies, whether they wanted it or not. The abandoned church bell tower crashed to the ground with a thunderous bang that shook the entire building, sending dust and debris flying everywhere as Jacob dove to protect Emma and Lily from the falling wood and metal. "Are you hurt?" Jacob shouted over the ringing in his ears, checking the girls for cuts or bruises. They huddled against him, coughing from the dust cloud that filled the old church where they'd been practicing their songs. "We're okay," Emma gasped, brushing dirt from her hair. "But our practice space just got a lot smaller." Jacob looked around at the damage. The old church on the edge of town had been their secret rehearsal spot for 2 weeks now, ever since he'd found the small house to rent. The building had been empty for years, with broken windows and creaky floors, but it had something the saloon didn't: peace and quiet. Now half the roof had caved in, and sunlight streamed through holes where the ceiling used to be. Their makeshift Stage 3 wooden crates, pushed together, lay buried under chunks of rotted timber. "Maybe this is a sign," Lily whispered, her voice shaking. "Maybe we're not supposed to be singers." "Don't say that," Jacob said firmly, helping them to their feet. "Every musician faces obstacles. The good ones find ways around them." But privately, Jacob wondered if Lily might be right. Nothing had been easy since they'd started performing together. The house he'd rented turned out to have a leaky roof and a stove that barely worked. Their first night at the Rusty Nail, a drunk cowboy had thrown a bottle at the stage, missing Emma's head by inches. Yesterday, Mrs. Patterson from the church ladies group had cornered him on the street, telling him it was improper for a single man to be raising two girls. "Look," Emma said, pointing to a corner of the church that had escaped damage. "The piano is still there." Jacob walked over to the old upright piano, its black paint peeling and several keys missing. He pressed middle C, and the note rang out clear and true, somehow surviving years of neglect. "It's still in tune," he said, amazed. "Well, mostly. Mama used to play piano," Lily said, running her fingers over the keys. "She taught us a song about birds flying free." "Can you remember it?" Jacob asked. Lily nodded and began to play, her small fingers finding the melody despite the missing keys. The song was simple but beautiful, about sparrows leaving their nest to find their own way in the world. Emma joined in with her voice, then Lily added harmony while still playing. Jacob felt his throat tighten. The song was perfect for their situation, three lost souls finding their way together. He picked up his fiddle and began to play along, adding deeper notes that made the melody richer. They were so absorbed in the music that they didn't notice the figure watching from the broken doorway until a slow clap echoed through the ruins. "Magnificent," said a smooth voice with a slight accent. "Simply magnificent." Jacob spun around to see a tall man in an expensive suit, despite the frontier setting. His hair was silver at the temples, and his mustache was waxed to sharp points. Everything about him screamed money and power. "Who are you?" Jacob demanded, stepping in front of the girls. "Silas Blackwood," the man said, removing his hat with a flourish. "I travel throughout the territories, seeking exceptional talent for my entertainment company." Emma and Lily pressed closer to Jacob's back. There was something about Blackwood's smile that didn't reach his eyes, like a snake pretending to be friendly. "We're not interested," Jacob said. "Oh, but you haven't heard my offer yet." Blackwood walked around the debris, his polished boots clicking on the wooden floor. "I've been watching your performances at the Rusty Nail. These children have a gift that could make them famous throughout the West." "They're not for sale," Jacob said flatly. "I'm not buying, I'm offering opportunity." Blackwood pulled out a leather folder from his jacket. "My traveling show performs in Denver, San Francisco, even Chicago. These girls could see the world, earn real money, live in proper hotels instead of frontier hovels." "We like it here," Emma said, her voice small but determined. Blackwood's smile widened. "Of course you do, child. You don't know any better. But imagine performing for audiences of hundreds, wearing beautiful dresses, eating in fine restaurants." "With you?" Lily asked suspiciously. "With my company, yes. I have other performers, musicians, dancers, actors. You'd be part of a family." Jacob felt anger building in his chest. "They already have a family." "Do they?" Blackwood's eyes grew cold. "A single man, no wife, living in a rented shack, playing music in a saloon? What kind of future is that for two talented girls?" The words hit Jacob like physical blows, because part of him wondered the same thing. Could he really give Emma and Lily the life they deserved? Was he being selfish, keeping them in a rough frontier town when they could have so much more? "We don't want to leave," Emma said, grabbing Jacob's hand. "We want to stay together." "Children often don't know what's best for them," Blackwood said smoothly. "That's why adults make the important decisions." "You're not their adult," Jacob said, his voice dangerous. "Neither are you officially." Blackwood's smile turned sharp. "No legal papers, no formal adoption. In the eyes of the law, these girls are still orphans." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Jacob realized that Blackwood wasn't just making an offer, he was issuing a warning. Without legal guardianship, Jacob had no real claim to Emma and Lily. "Think about it," Blackwood said, putting his hat back on. "I'll be in town for 3 days. After that, I'll be forced to explore other options for ensuring these children's welfare." He walked toward the door, then paused. "Oh, and Harrison? You might want to fix that roof before someone gets hurt. Accidents can be so unfortunate." After he left, the church felt colder despite the sunlight streaming through the broken ceiling. Emma and Lily stood close together, fear written across their faces. "He can't take us away, can he?" Lily asked. Jacob wanted to say no, to promise them they'd always be together, but the words stuck in his throat. Blackwood was right about one thing legally. Jacob had no claim to the girls. He'd been so focused on keeping them fed and safe that he'd never thought about making it official. "We need to talk to Judge Morrison," he said finally. "See about legal guardianship." "What if he says no?" Emma asked. "What if he thinks we belong with Mr. Blackwood?" Jacob knelt down to their level, looking into their worried faces. "Then we'll figure something else out. But I promise you this, as long as there's breath in my body, I won't let anyone separate us." Thunder rumbled overhead, and the first drops of rain began to fall through the broken roof. Jacob gathered his fiddle and sheet music, while the girls collected their things. "Where will we practice now?" Lily asked as they hurried toward the door. "We'll find somewhere," Jacob said, though he wasn't sure where. The saloon was too noisy, their house too small, and now their secret church was ruined. As they ran through the streets toward home, Jacob couldn't shake the feeling that their problems were just beginning. Blackwood hadn't become successful by giving up easily, and men like him always had more cards to play. But Jacob had something Blackwood didn't: two girls who trusted him completely, and the determination to protect them no matter what it cost. The Dakota Harmonies had faced their first real threat, and they'd stood together. Now they'd have to prove that family wasn't about blood or legal papers, but about the bonds that music and love could create. The question was, would that be enough? Judge Morrison's gavel slammed down like a gunshot, and Jacob's heart sank as the words echoed through the cramped courthouse. Petition for emergency guardianship denied due to insufficient evidence of stable living conditions. Emma and Lily sat on the hard wooden bench behind Jacob, their faces pale as winter snow. They'd spent the morning in their best clothes, Emma in a blue dress. Mrs. Henderson had loaned her Lily in yellow, hoping to look like proper young ladies for the judge, but Judge Morrison had barely looked at them. However, the judge continued, shuffling through his papers, "I am willing to grant a temporary custody arrangement while Mr. Harrison addresses the court's concerns." Jacob's lawyer, a thin man named Stevens, who smelled like old books and tobacco, leaned forward. "What concerns specifically, Your Honor?" "Housing, income, stability, and proper supervision for two young girls." Judge Morrison peered over his spectacles at Jacob. "Mr. Harrison, you rent a one-bedroom house with a leaking roof. Your income comes from playing music in a saloon. You have no wife to provide feminine guidance for these children." "They're not just children," Jacob said, standing up despite Stephen's warning hand on his arm. "They're singers. They have talent that—" "Talent doesn't put food on the table or provide moral guidance," the judge interrupted. "Mr. Blackwood has presented me with information about his traveling show. He provides education, proper accommodations, and supervision by trained female staff members." Jacob felt the walls closing in. "Your Honor, these girls don't want to leave. They want to stay with me." What children want and what they need are often different things. Judge Morrison's voice softened slightly. "I can see you care for them, Mr. Harrison, but caring isn't enough. You have 30 days to find suitable housing, establish steady income, and arrange for proper female supervision. If you can't meet these requirements, the girls will be placed with Mr. Blackwood's organization." The gavel fell again, final as a coffin lid. Jacob turned to see Emma and Lily holding hands, tears streaming down their faces. They'd heard every word, understood that their new family was hanging by a thread. 30 days, Stephen said as they walked out of the courthouse. "It's not impossible, but it won't be easy. You'll need a bigger house, steady work, and probably a woman to help with the girls." "Where am I supposed to find all that?" Jacob asked, feeling overwhelmed. "One step at a time," Stevens replied. "Start with the house. Mrs. Patterson mentioned she might have a place for rent." Jacob's stomach churned. Mrs. Patterson was the same woman who told him it was improper for a single man to raise two girls. Going to her for help would be like walking into a lion's den. That evening, Jacob sat in the rusty nail, playing his fiddle while Emma and Lily sang. But the music felt hollow, like they were just going through the motions. The crowd seemed to sense something was wrong. Two conversations continued, instead of stopping to listen, and the usual pile of coins barely covered their dinner. "What's eating you three?" Pete asked during their break. "You sound like you're playing at a funeral." Jacob told him about the court hearing, the judge's requirements, and the 30-day deadline. Pete listened while polishing glasses, his expression growing more serious with each detail. "Mrs. Patterson, huh?" Pete finally said. "She's got that big house on Elm Street. Been empty since her husband died last year." "She hates me," Jacob said. "Thinks I'm corrupting the girls by having them sing in a saloon." "Maybe," Pete said. "But she's also a practical woman. That house is costing her money, sitting empty, and winter's coming. Might be she'll make a deal if you approach her right." Emma and Lily were sitting at a corner table, sharing a piece of pie and whispering to each other. Jacob watched them, remembering how frightened they'd been when he first found them in the alley. Now they were part of his life, part of his heart. The thought of losing them made his chest feel like it was being squeezed by a giant fist. "There's something else," Pete said quietly. "I've been thinking about expanding the saloon's entertainment, maybe having music every night instead of just weekends. It would mean steady pay for you, enough to impress a judge." Jacob looked up, hope flickering in his chest. "You mean it?" "Business has been good since you three started performing. Folks come from other towns just to hear you sing. I'd be foolish not to capitalize on that. What about the church ladies who complained about children singing in a saloon?" Pete's mustache twitched with amusement. "Let them complain. Money talks louder than moral indignation." After they finished performing, Jacob walked Emma and Lily home through the quiet streets. The girls were unusually subdued, their earlier chatter replaced by worried silence. "Are we going to have to leave?" Lily asked as they reached their front door. Jacob unlocked the door and lit the oil lamp, casting dancing shadows on the walls. "Not if I can help it. We're going to fight this." "How?" Emma asked. "By proving we're a real family, even if we don't look like other families." Jacob sat down on the small sofa, and the girls curled up on either side of him. "We'll find a better house. I'll get steady work, and we'll show everyone that we belong together." "What if it's not enough?" Lily whispered. Jacob put his arms around both girls, pulling them close. "Then we'll figure out something else. But I want you to know something. No matter what happens, no matter where we end up, you'll always be my daughters. Not because of what any judge says, but because of what's in here." He tapped his chest over his heart. Emma looked up at him with eyes that seemed too old for her face. "Promise?" "Promise," Jacob said, meaning it with every fiber of his being. That night, after the girls were asleep, Jacob sat at the kitchen table with a piece of paper and a pencil, making lists. He needed to find a house, arrange steady work, and somehow convince a respectable woman to help supervise the girls. It seemed impossible, but impossible things had happened before. After all, what were the chances of a broken-hearted widower finding two orphan girls who could sing like angels? What were the odds of three lost souls finding each other in a rough frontier town and becoming a family? Sometimes the best things in life were the ones that seemed impossible. Jacob had 30 days to prove that love and determination could overcome legal requirements and social expectations. It wouldn't be easy, but then again, nothing worthwhile ever was. He picked up his pencil and began to write, starting with the most important item on his list: keep my family together, no matter what. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows of their little house. But inside, 3 hearts beat together, and that was enough to start with. Lightning split the sky like a jagged knife as Mrs. Patterson's front door slammed shut in Jacob's face, her final words still ringing in his ears. "I'd rather burn that house down than rent it to the likes of you." Rain hammered the porch roof, where Jacob stood dripping wet, his hat in his hands and his pride somewhere around his muddy boots. This was his 3rd rejection today, and time was running out faster than water through a broken dam. Only 22 days left to meet the judge's requirements, and every respectable landlord in Deadwood Gulch had turned him away. "She's got no right treating you like that," said a voice behind him. Jacob turned to see Mary Sullivan, the young Irish woman who worked as a seamstress above the general store. She was standing under the store's awning, holding a basket of mending and watching the rain with green eyes that missed nothing. Mrs. Patterson's got her opinions, Jacob said, trying to sound like the rejection didn't sting. Her opinions are worth about as much as a $3 bill. Mary stepped closer, lowering her voice. I heard what happened in court. Those girls need you, and you need them. Anyone with eyes can see that. Jacob had noticed Mary Beaufourchet was hard to miss, with her red hair and quick smile. She'd come to their performances at the Rusty Nail a few times, always sitting in the back, always leaving before he could talk to her. Now she was looking at him with something that might have been sympathy, or maybe something else. Problem is, needing and having aren't the same thing, Jacob said. Judge Morrison wants things I can't provide. Like what? A proper house, steady income, and female supervision for the girls. The words tasted bitter in his mouth. Apparently, a single man isn't fit to raise children, even if those children chose him. Mary studied his face for a long moment. What if you weren't single? The question hit Jacob like a thunderclap. What do you mean? I mean marriage, Mr. Harrison. A business arrangement that would solve your problems. And maybe mine too. Jacob stared at her, wondering if the lightning had addled his brain. Miss Sullivan, I barely know you. And I barely know you, she replied calmly. But I know you're a good man trying to protect two little girls. And I know I'm tired of living in a room above a store, sewing other people's clothes for pennies. The rain drummed harder, creating a curtain of water between them and the rest of the world. Jacob felt like he was standing at the edge of a cliff, looking down into unknown territory. Why would you even consider such a thing? He asked. Mary's expression grew serious. Because I've been watching you three for weeks. I see how those girls look at you like you hung the moon and stars. And I see how you look at them like they're the most precious things on earth. That's not something you can fake. A gust of wind sent rain spattering across the porch, and Mary pulled her shawl tighter. Besides, I know what it's like to be alone. My family died in the potato famine back in Ireland. I came here with nothing but hope and a needle. Maybe it's time I had a real family again. Jacob's mind raced. A marriage of convenience wasn't what he'd planned when he'd buried Margaret 3 months ago. But then again, finding 2 orphaned girls hadn't been part of his plan either, and that had turned out to be the best thing that ever happened to him. The girls would have to agree, he said slowly. I won't do anything they don't want. Of course not, Mary said. Children should have a say in their own lives. And it would be a business arrangement, Jacob continued. Nothing romantic, just a legal partnership to keep our family together. Mary nodded. I understand. You loved your wife, and that's not something you can replace. But maybe, in time, we could become friends. Thunder rolled across the sky, and Jacob made his decision. Miss Sullivan, would you like to come to dinner tonight? I think you should meet Emma and Lily properly before we discuss this any further. That evening, their small house seemed even smaller, with 4 people gathered around the kitchen table. Jacob had cooked his best meal beef stew with vegetables and fresh bread from the bakery while Emma and Lily sat staring at Mary like she was a puzzle they couldn't solve. So, Emma said finally, Jacob says you might want to marry him. Mary nearly choked on her stew. Well, that's certainly direct. We don't beat around the bush, Lily added. Are you going to try to boss us around? I wouldn't dream of it, Mary replied, recovering her composure. I figure you two know your own minds better than most adults. Emma and Lily exchanged one of their silent twin conversations. Jacob held his breath, knowing their answer would determine everything. Can you sing? Emma asked. Mary blinked in surprise. A little? Why? Because we're the Dakota Harmonies, Lily explained. Music is important to us. Very important, Emma added. If you're going to be part of our family, you need to understand that. Mary looked around the table at their serious faces and began to laugh not mockingly, but with genuine delight. You know what? I think I like you two already. Does that mean yes? Lily asked. It means I'd be honored to be part of the Dakota Harmonies, Mary said, even if I can only carry a tune in a bucket. After dinner, while Mary helped with dishes, Emma and Lily pulled Jacob aside. She seems nice, Emma whispered. But are you sure about this? Jacob looked through the kitchen doorway at Mary, who was humming while she dried plates. I'm sure that I want you girls to have the best life possible. If marrying Miss Sullivan helps make that happen, then yes, I'm sure. Do you think Mama would mind? Lily asked. About you marrying someone else? The question pierced Jacob's heart, but he answered honestly. I think your Mama would want you to be safe and happy, and I think my Margaret would want the same thing. Sometimes love means making hard choices for the people we care about. Emma nodded solemnly. Then we think you should marry her, but only if she promises not to change our music. I'll make sure she understands, Jacob said, pulling both girls into a hug. Later, as Mary prepared to leave, she paused at the door. There's something you should know, she said quietly. I heard Silas Blackwood talking to Judge Morrison yesterday. He's not planning to wait 30 days. Jacob's blood ran cold. What do you mean? He's been asking questions about your character, trying to find reasons to have the girls removed immediately. He mentioned something about unsuitable living conditions and moral concerns. What kind of moral concerns? Mary's face flushed pink. A single man living alone with 2 young girls. People talk, and Blackwood's been encouraging them to talk louder. Jacob felt anger burning in his chest. He'd been so focused on meeting the judge's requirements that he hadn't considered Blackwood might be working against him actively. We need to get married quickly, Mary said, before he can cause more trouble. How quickly? Tomorrow, if possible. Pastor Williams could perform a simple ceremony after his regular service. Jacob looked back at the kitchen, where Emma and Lily were finishing the dishes and chatting quietly. They'd already lost one family. He wouldn't let them lose another. Tomorrow, then, he agreed. But are you absolutely certain about this, Miss Sullivan? Once we're married, there's no going back. Mary smiled, and for the first time since Margaret's death, Jacob felt like maybe the future held something besides loneliness and struggle. Mr. Harrison, she said, I've been waiting my whole life for a family worth fighting for. I think I've finally found one. As she walked away into the night, Jacob realized that sometimes the most unexpected solutions came from the most unlikely places. Tomorrow, he would marry a woman he barely knew to protect 2 girls who meant everything to him. It wasn't the life he'd planned, but it might just be the life they all needed. The wedding dress lay in bloody tatters on Mary Sullivan's bedroom floor, shredded by a knife that had missed her throat by mere inches as she jerked awake to find a masked intruder standing over her bed. Don't move, don't scream, the man had whispered before fleeing through her window when she'd fought back, leaving only the ruined dress and a message scrawled on her mirror in soap. Stay away from the children. Now Mary sat on the edge of her narrow bed, her hands shaking as she held the pieces of white fabric that were supposed to transform her into a bride in just 4 hours. Sunlight streamed through the broken window, highlighting the destruction that had once been her most treasured possession, her mother's wedding dress, carried all the way from Ireland. A soft knock came at her door. Mary? It's Jacob. Are you ready for? His voice cut off as she opened the door, and he saw her tear-streaked face and the chaos behind her. Sweet Jesus, he breathed, stepping inside. What happened? Mary told him everything, her voice barely steady. Jacob's face grew darker with each detail, his hands clenching into fists when she described the knife and the threatening message. Blackwood, he said, the name coming out like a curse. This has his fingerprints all over it. We can't prove it, Mary said, sinking into her chair. And even if we could, what good would it do? He's already shown he's willing to use violence. Jacob knelt beside her chair, his eyes fierce. Are you hurt? Did he touch you? No, just scared. Mary managed a weak smile. Good thing I sleep light. Years of living in rough neighborhoods taught me to wake up fast. We should call off the wedding, Jacob said. I won't have you risking your life for us. Absolutely not. Mary's voice turned steel. Hard. Some coward with a knife isn't going to stop me from protecting those girls. Besides, calling off the wedding is exactly what he wants. Jacob studied her face, seeing the determination beneath the fear. You're sure? I'm sure. But we have a problem. I don't have anything to wear. Emma and Lily burst through the door at that moment, their faces bright with excitement that quickly faded when they saw the destroyed room. What happened? Emma demanded. Someone broke in, Mary explained gently. They ruined my dress. Lily picked up a piece of the torn fabric, her eyes filling with tears. "It was your mama's dress, wasn't it?" Mary nodded, not trusting her voice. "That's not right," Emma said, her young face fierce with anger. "Nobody should destroy something that belonged to someone's mama." "We'll find another dress," Jacob said. "Mrs. Henderson might have something." "No," Lily interrupted, her voice suddenly excited. "I have an idea, but we'll need to hurry." An hour later, Mary stood in the church vestry wearing the most unusual wedding dress in Dakota Territory history. Lily had remembered the trunk of costumes in the old theater above the saloon abandoned by a traveling acting troupe years ago. Emma had found a beautiful blue gown with silver embroidery, and Mary had hemmed it quickly, while the girls gathered wildflowers for a bouquet. "You look like a princess," Lily breathed. "A warrior princess," Emma corrected. "The kind who fights bad guys and protects people." Mary laughed, feeling some of her earlier fear fade away. "I suppose that's exactly what I am today." Pastor Williams appeared in the doorway, his usual stern expression softened by concern. "Miss Sullivan, I heard about the break-in. Are you certain you want to proceed?" "More certain than ever," Mary replied. The ceremony was small but meaningful. Pete Garrison served as Jacob's best man, while Emma and Lily stood up as Mary's bridesmaids. Mrs. Henderson sat in the front pew, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. Even a few of the saloon's regular customers had cleaned up and come to witness the unusual wedding. As Pastor Williams began the ceremony, Mary noticed a figure lurking near the back of the church. Silas Blackwood stood in the shadows, his face a mask of controlled fury. He'd clearly expected his intimidation tactics to work, and finding the wedding proceeding as planned had caught him off guard. "Do you, Jacob Harrison, take Mary Sullivan to be your lawfully wedded wife?" Pastor Williams asked. "I do," Jacob said, his voice carrying clearly through the small church. "And do you, Mary Sullivan, take Jacob Harrison to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Mary looked into Jacob's eyes, seeing not romance, but something perhaps more valuable: respect, gratitude, and the shared determination to protect their family. "I do." As they exchanged simple gold rings, Emma and Lily beamed with pride. They understood this wasn't a fairy tale wedding, but something more practical, and perhaps more courageous, adults choosing to build a life together for the sake of the children they loved. "You may kiss the bride," Pastor Williams announced. Jacob leaned forward and gave Mary a gentle kiss on the cheek, sealing their bargain with dignity rather than passion. The small congregation erupted in applause, and Emma and Lily rushed forward to hug their new mother. But as they walked down the aisle together, Mary caught sight of Blackwood's face. His earlier fury had been replaced by something colder and more calculating. This wasn't over, if anything. Her refusal to be intimidated had only made him more dangerous. After the ceremony, they gathered at Pete's saloon for a simple reception. Jacob played his fiddle while Emma and Lily sang, their voices blending with the laughter and conversation of their friends and neighbors. For a few hours, it felt like a real celebration. But as the afternoon wore on, Mary noticed several townspeople whispering in corners, their expressions troubled. Finally, Dr. Henley approached Jacob with a grim face. "I hate to spoil the celebration," he said quietly, "but there's something you need to know. Blackwood's been spreading rumors about your relationship with the girls. Nasty ones." Jacob's jaw tightened. "What kind of rumors?" "The kind that could get you arrested," Dr. Henley replied. "He's been suggesting that your interest in the girls isn't appropriate. Some people are starting to listen." Mary felt sick to her stomach. They'd gotten married to solve their legal problems, but Blackwood was creating new ones faster than they could address them. "What do we do?" she asked. "We fight back," Jacob said grimly. "But not with fists or knives. We fight with the truth." Emma tugged on Mary's sleeve. "What's wrong? Why does everyone look worried?" Mary knelt down to the girl's level, choosing her words carefully. "Some people are saying untrue things about Jacob. We need to prove they're wrong." "How?" Lily asked. "By showing everyone what kind of man he really is," Mary said. "By letting our music speak for us." Jacob nodded slowly. "One more performance. Tomorrow night. We'll invite the whole town. Let them see for themselves what kind of family we are." And if it doesn't work? Emma asked. Mary looked at her new husband, seeing the same determination in his eyes that had brought him this far. Then we'll figure out something else. But we won't give up. As they cleaned up from the reception, Mary found herself humming one of the songs Emma and Lily had taught her. Despite everything, the break-in, the threats, the rumors, she felt hopeful for the first time in years. She had a family now, and family was worth fighting for, even if the fight was just beginning. Outside, storm clouds gathered on the horizon, promising a rough night ahead. But inside the saloon, the Dakota Harmonies +1 were planning their most important performance Yi-tone that would determine whether love and music could triumph over fear and greed. The wedding was over, but the real test of their marriage was just beginning. Fire erupted from the window of Patterson's boarding house at precisely 9 o'clock that morning, sending black smoke billowing into the sky and bringing half of Deadwood Gulch running with buckets as Jacob watched his last hope for decent housing go up in flames. "Started in the kitchen?" Sheriff Coleman said, mopping sweat from his forehead as the volunteer fire brigade finally controlled the blaze. "Faulty stovepipe, most likely. Lucky nobody was hurt." But Jacob knew it wasn't luck or faulty equipment. Mrs. Patterson stood across the street, her face pale with shock, staring at the charred remains of the house she'd refused to rent to him just yesterday. The timing was too convenient, the fire too convenient, especially with Blackwood nowhere to be seen this morning. "That's the third fire this month," Dr. Henley observed, joining Jacob on the sidewalk. "First the old mill, then the Johnson barn, now this. Makes a man wonder." "Wonder what?" Jacob asked, though he already suspected the answer. Whether someone's trying to control property values in this town, burn out the competition, create scarcity, drive up prices. Dr. Henley's eyes were shrewd behind his spectacles. Or maybe eliminate options for certain people who need housing. Emma and Lily appeared at Jacob's side, having run from their new house when they saw the smoke. Mary followed close behind, her face grim with understanding. "Was anyone inside?" Emma asked, her voice small. "No, sweetheart," Jacob assured her. "Mrs. Patterson was at church when it started." But privately, Jacob felt the walls closing in. The boarding house had been their backup plan if they couldn't find a suitable rental. Now their options had dwindled to almost nothing, and they still had 18 days to meet Judge Morrison's requirements. "We need to talk," Mary said quietly, pulling Jacob aside. "I've been asking around about houses for rent. Every decent place in town has suddenly been taken or withdrawn from the market." "All of them?" "Every single one. And the landlords all give the same excuse: they've decided to sell instead of rent." Mary's Irish accent grew thicker when she was angry. "Someone's been very busy making sure we have nowhere to go." Jacob felt a familiar surge of helpless rage. Blackwood was playing a chess game while Jacob was stuck playing checkers, always one move behind. "There is one option," Mary continued reluctantly. "My cousin Patrick has a farm about 10 miles out of town. He's got a house that's been empty since his wife died. It's rough, but it's clean and structurally sound." 10 miles out of town? Jacob frowned. That would mean no more performances at the Rusty Nail, no steady income, and the girls would have to attend the country school instead of staying in town. Mary's voice was heavy with the weight of bad choices. But it would be a proper house with enough bedrooms to satisfy the judge. Emma had been listening despite their efforts to speak quietly. "We'd have to stop singing?" "Not stop," Jacob said quickly. "Just change venues. Maybe we could perform in other towns, travel around the territory." Lily's eyes filled with tears. "But then we'd be just like the people who left us before, always moving, never staying anywhere long enough to make friends." The words cut deep because they held truth. Jacob had been thinking about giving the girls stability, but moving to a remote farm would only trade one set of problems for another. "What if we built our own place?" Emma suggested suddenly. "Built our own place?" Jacob repeated. "Like the pioneers do. Find some land and build a house ourselves." Emma's eyes grew bright with possibility. "Mrs. Henderson told us about homesteading. You can claim land if you're willing to work it." Mary and Jacob exchanged glances. The idea had merit, but also enormous challenges. Building a house takes time, Mary said gently. We only have 18 days. What if we didn't build from scratch? Lily added, caught up in her sister's enthusiasm. What if we found somewhere that was already partly built? Dr. Henley, who had been eavesdropping shamelessly, stepped forward. You know, there might be something to that idea. Old Henderson's original homestead is about 5 miles north of town. He built a cabin there before he moved into town and started the store. It's been empty for years, but the structure's still sound. Jacob felt a spark of hope. Would he sell? Might. He's been complaining about paying taxes on land he doesn't use, and after what happened to his friend Mrs. Patterson today, he might be more sympathetic to your situation. An hour later, Jacob and Mary rode out to examine Henderson's old homestead, while Emma and Lily stayed in town with Mrs. Henderson. The cabin sat in a small valley surrounded by cottonwood trees, with a clear stream running nearby and good grazing land stretching toward the hills. The building was smaller than what they'd hoped, for just 2 rooms and a loft, but it was well built and surprisingly clean. More importantly, it was far enough from town to discourage casual visitors, but close enough for Jacob to continue performing. It would need work, Mary said, examining the stone fireplace. New chinking between the logs, better windows, maybe an addition if we could afford it. But it's ours, Jacob said, feeling something that might have been peace for the first time in weeks. No landlords to disapprove, no neighbors to gossip, no one to tell us we're not good enough. They found Henderson in his store that afternoon, tallying inventory, with the grim expression of a man who'd watched too many friends suffer lately. The homestead? He looked up from his ledger book. What would you want with that old place? Jacob explained their situation, honestly the judge's requirements, Blackwood's interference, and their dwindling options. Henderson listened without interruption, his weathered face growing more thoughtful with each detail. Blackwood came to see me yesterday, Henderson said finally, offered to buy the homestead for twice what it's worth, said he was planning to develop the area. Mary's heart sank. And you accepted? I told him I'd think about it. Henderson's eyes twinkled. Didn't say how long I'd think. Could take me months to make up my mind. Hope flared in Jacob's chest. Would you consider selling to us instead? For the right price. To the right people. Henderson named a figure that was steep but not impossible. But I'd want proof you're serious about making it work. This isn't a game for folks looking for easy answers. What kind of proof? Mary asked. Henderson pointed toward the back of the store. I've got supplies sitting back there, lumber, nails, tools, everything you'd need to fix up that cabin properly. Winter's coming fast, and if you're going to make this work, you'd need to have the place livable in 2 weeks. Jacob felt the familiar weight of an impossible challenge, but also something else, excitement. For the first time since this whole crisis began, they had a path forward that didn't depend on other people's approval. 2 weeks, he repeated, to make the cabin livable and prove we're serious. 2 weeks, Henderson confirmed, and I'll want to see the girls settled and happy before I sign any papers. This isn't just about money, it's about doing right by children who've already been hurt too much. As they walked home that evening, Mary slipped her hand into Jacob's, the first physical affection between them since their awkward wedding kiss. Are we crazy? She asked. Trying to fix up a homestead in 2 weeks while fighting off a man who's already tried violence? Jacob looked at the sunset painting the sky in shades of gold and red, thinking about Emma and Lily waiting at home, probably practicing their harmonies and planning their next performance. Probably, he admitted. But crazy might be exactly what we need. Blackwood's been playing by society's rules, using law and money and influence to get what he wants. Maybe it's time we stop playing by his rules. What do you mean? I mean, we build something he can't tear down. Not a rented house or a legal arrangement, but a real home that belongs to us completely. Jacob squeezed her hand. Something worth fighting for. Behind them, the lights of Deadwood Gulch twinkled in the gathering darkness. Ahead lay uncertainty, hard work, and the very real possibility of failure. But for the first time in months, Jacob felt like they were moving toward something instead of running away from it, and that made all the difference in the world. The sound of splintering wood echoed through the valley as Jacob's hammer missed the nail and smashed into his thumb. sending him dancing around the half-built cabin addition while Emma and Lily collapsed in giggles and Mary tried not to smile. "Language, Jacob Harrison," Mary called from where she was, chinking gaps between the logs with mud and moss. "There are impressionable young ladies present." "Sorry," Jacob muttered, sucking his wounded thumb, "but this board has a personal grudge against me." It was day 5 of their 2-week deadline, and the homestead buzzed with activity from dawn to dusk. Emma and Lily had appointed themselves official water carriers and nail sorters, while Mary proved surprisingly handy with a saw and measuring tape. Even Dr. Henley and Pete Garrison had volunteered their Saturday to help with the heavy lifting. "You know," Pete said, wrestling a window frame into place, "I never thought I'd spend my day off doing carpentry for a man who plays fiddle music. And I never thought I'd see you lift anything heavier than a whiskey bottle," Jacob shot back, earning laughter from the work crew. The cabin was slowly taking shape. What had started as a simple 2-room structure now boasted a proper kitchen addition, a small parlor, and plans for 2 upstairs bedrooms under the expanded roofline. It wasn't fancy, but it would be comfortable and, most importantly, theirs. "Jacob!" Emma called from her perch on the porch roof where she was helping Dr. Henley install shingles. "Someone's coming up the road." Jacob looked up from his lumber pile to see a familiar buggy approaching, driven by Judge Morrison himself. Behind him rode Sheriff Coleman and, to Jacob's dismay, Silas Blackwood on a fine black horse. "Well," Mary said quietly, setting down her tools, "I suppose it was too much to hope they'd leave us alone." The 3 men approached the building site with the grim formality of an official inspection. Judge Morrison climbed down from his buggy and surveyed the construction with sharp eyes. "Mr. Harrison," he said formally, "I've received reports that you've abandoned your residence in town without notifying the court." "We haven't abandoned anything, Your Honor," Jacob replied, wiping sawdust from his hands. "We're establishing a new residence that better meets your requirements." "On whose authority?" Blackwood interjected smoothly. "As I understand it, you don't own this land." "We have an agreement with Mr. Henderson," Mary said, stepping to Jacob's side. "The paperwork will be finalized once the improvements are complete." Sheriff Coleman looked uncomfortable. "Judge, they're clearly working hard to meet your conditions. Maybe we should give them time to—" "Time is exactly what they don't have," Blackwood interrupted. "Your Honor, I submit that this entire enterprise is a desperate attempt to circumvent the law. These people are camping on land they don't own, involving children in dangerous construction work and exposing them to unsuitable living conditions." Emma and Lily had climbed down from the roof and now stood close to Jacob and Mary, their faces showing the fear that had become too familiar lately. "The living conditions will be perfectly suitable," Dr. Henley said firmly. "I've examined the structure myself, and when completed, it will be safer and more comfortable than half the houses in town." "If completed," Blackwood emphasized, "which seems unlikely given their obvious lack of experience and resources." Judge Morrison walked around the building site, examining the foundation, testing the stability of the walls, and peering into the partially finished rooms. His expression gave nothing away. "How much more work remains?" he asked finally. Jacob did quick calculations in his head. "The roof needs to be finished, windows installed, floors laid in the addition, and the interior walls completed. Maybe a week's worth of work with enough help." "And you have enough help?" "The whole town's been pitching in," Pete said proudly. "Haven't seen community spirit like this since the flood of '65. Blackwood's face darkened at this news. His strategy had been based on isolating Jacob's family, making them seem like outsiders who didn't belong. The sight of half the town working together to build their house clearly frustrated his plans. "Your Honor," Blackwood said, his voice taking on a dangerous edge, "I must insist that you consider the welfare of these children. They're living in what amounts to a construction site, exposed to injury from tools and falling materials. Surely that constitutes endangerment." "The children are perfectly safe," Mary said sharply. "They're supervised at all times and kept away from dangerous work." "By whom? A saloon musician and a seamstress?" Blackwood's sneer was barely concealed. "What qualifications do you have to judge what's safe for children?" The insult hung in the air like smoke from a gun. Jacob felt his temper rising, but before he could respond, Emma stepped forward. "Mr. Blackwood," she said in her clear, caring voice, "why do you want to take us away so badly?" The direct question from a child seemed to catch Blackwood off guard. "I'm thinking of your welfare, my dear. You deserve better than this rough frontier life." "Better how?" Lily joined her sister, the two of them facing the adult with fearless curiosity. "You keep saying we deserve better, but you never ask us what we want." "Children don't always know what's best for them," Blackwood replied, his patience clearly wearing thin. "Maybe not," Emma said, "but we know what makes us happy, and building a home with people who love us makes us happy." "Even if it's hard work?" Judge Morrison asked, his first direct question to the girls. "Especially because it's hard work," Lily answered. "Mama used to say that things you work for are worth more than things that come easy." Judge Morrison nodded slowly, then turned to Sheriff Coleman. "I want a full inspection of this property, in 1 week. If the structure is sound, the living conditions appropriate, and the children's welfare protected, then I see no reason to interfere with this family's choices." Blackwood's face flushed with anger. "Your Honor, I must protest." "Your protest is noted and overruled," Judge Morrison said firmly. 1 week, Mr. Harrison. Don't disappoint me." As the three men prepared to leave, Blackwood lingered behind. "This isn't over," he said quietly to Jacob. "You may have impressed a judge and fooled some simple townspeople, but I know what you really are." "And what's that?" Jacob asked, his voice steady despite the threat. "A man living a lie, and lies always catch up with you eventually." After they left, the work crew stood in uncomfortable silence for a moment. Then Pete spat in the dust and picked up his hammer. "Well," he said, "I guess we'd better get back to work. That roof won't finish itself." The rest of the day passed in a blur of activity. Word of the judge's ultimatum spread quickly, and by evening, more volunteers had arrived. Mrs. Henderson brought a wagon full of supplies. 3 cowboys from the Bar M Ranch offered their carpentry skills, and even Pastor Williams showed up with his sons to help with the roofing. As the sun set on their 5th day, Jacob stood in the doorway of what would soon be their kitchen, watching Mary teach Emma and Lily how to measure and cut boards for the interior walls. The girls' laughter mixed with the sound of hammers and saws, creating a symphony of hope and determination. They had 1 week to prove that family wasn't about bloodlines or legal documents, but about people choosing to build something together. 1 week to show that love and hard work could overcome money and influence. It seemed impossible, but then again, 6 months ago it had seemed impossible that a broken-hearted widower would find 2 orphan girls who could sing like angels. Sometimes the most impossible things turned out to be the most true. "Think we can do it?" Mary asked, appearing at his elbow with sawdust in her hair and pride in her eyes. Jacob looked around at their neighbors working by lamplight, at Emma and Lily measuring boards with serious concentration, at the solid walls rising around them. "I think," he said, "we already are." The roof beam cracked like a gunshot and came crashing down, missing Lily's head by inches as she dove behind a pile of lumber, while Jacob's heart nearly stopped beating in his chest. "Lily!" Emma screamed, scrambling over sawhorses and wood scraps to reach her sister. "Are you hurt?" Dust filled the air where the heavy wooden beam had smashed into the floor, splintering boards and destroying a morning's worth of careful work. Lily emerged from behind the lumber pile, shaken but unharmed, her face pale as winter snow. "I'm okay," she whispered, then louder. "I'm okay." Jacob rushed to her side, his hands trembling as he checked for injuries. This was exactly what Blackwood had warned about children getting hurt in a dangerous construction site. If Judge Morrison heard about this? "What happened?" Mary demanded, climbing down from the loft, where she'd been installing windows. Dr. Henley examined the broken beam, his face grim. "Someone sawed halfway through this beam. It was meant to fall." The words hit Jacob like ice water. "Sabotage?" "No question about it." Dr. Henley pointed to the clean saw marks hidden where the beam met the wall. This was deliberate. Someone wanted this roof to collapse. Pete Garrison appeared in the doorway, having heard the crash from outside. "Anyone hurt?" "Just scared," Jacob said, but his mind was racing. They had only 2 days left until Judge Morrison's inspection, and now they'd lost hours of work plus materials they couldn't afford to replace. "We'll have to start over on this section," Mary said, trying to keep her voice steady for the girls' sake. "Cut new beams, reframe everything." "With what?" Jacob asked. "We used the last of Henderson's lumber yesterday." The reality of their situation sank in. Without materials, they couldn't finish the house. Without a finished house, they'd fail the inspection. Without passing the inspection, Emma and Lily would be taken away. "I might know where to get more lumber," said a quiet voice from the doorway. Everyone turned to see Tommy Henderson, the storekeeper's teenage son, shifting nervously from foot to foot. "Where?" Jacob asked. Tommy glanced around to make sure no adults were listening too closely. "There's a pile of good lumber behind the old Jameson place. Been sitting there since he started building a barn last spring, before he got sick and died. His widow moved back east and left everything behind." "That would be stealing," Mary said firmly. "Not if we ask permission first," Emma suggested. "Maybe Mrs. Jameson would sell it to us, or let us work for it." Jacob felt a spark of hope. "Do you know how to contact her, Tommy?" "Pa might. He handled some of her business before she left town." An hour later, Jacob sat in Henderson's store, while the older man composed a telegram to Mrs. Jameson in St. Louis. Emma and Lily waited outside with Mary, practicing their harmonies to keep their minds off their troubles. "She was a good woman," Henderson said as he wrote. "Lost her husband to pneumonia, couldn't manage the property alone. I think she'd be sympathetic to your situation." "How long for an answer?" "Telegraph office says maybe 2 days, if we're lucky." Jacob's heart sank. They didn't have 2 days. Judge Morrison would arrive tomorrow afternoon for his inspection. "There might be another option," Henderson continued thoughtfully. "My brother-in-law owns a sawmill up near Lead City. He owes me a favor, and he's got lumber cut and seasoned. Problem is, it's a day's ride each way. So we'd have the materials tomorrow night, with less than 12 hours to finish the work before the inspection." "It's not impossible," Henderson said, "if you had enough help." Jacob thought about the volunteers who'd been working on the housegood people, but most of them had jobs and families of their own. Asking them to work through the night seemed like too much. "I'll do it," he decided, "even if I have to work alone." "You won't be alone," said Mary from the doorway. She'd been listening with Emma and Lily pressed close to her sides. "We're a family. Families stick together." That evening, Jacob rode hard toward Lead City while Mary and the girls prepared for a long night of construction. Word had spread through town about the sabotage and the race against time, and by sunset, an unexpected crowd had gathered at the homestead. "Heard you could use some help," said Miguel Santos, a Mexican carpenter who rarely socialized with the Anglo townspeople. "My boys and we know how to frame a house fast." "I brought coffee and sandwiches," added Mrs. Chen, the Chinese woman who ran the laundry. "Workers need food." Even some of the saloon girls showed up, their fancy dresses replaced with work clothes and determined expressions. "Nobody hurts children on our watch," declared Big Martha, the largest and toughest of Pete's employees. Mary looked around at the diverse group of volunteers people who normally didn't mix socially, but who'd come together for a common cause. "Are you sure about this? It's going to be a long, hard night." "Lady," said Miguel, already unpacking his tools, "my family came here with nothing. Sometimes the community helps you. Sometimes you help the community. Tonight, we help." Jacob returned near midnight with a wagon load of lumber and the news that Henderson's brother-in-law had donated the materials in exchange for a promise of future performances by the Dakota Harmonies. The homestead was ablaze with lanterns and torches, looking like a festival site. "How much have we accomplished?" Jacob asked, amazed by the progress. "New beams are cut and ready," Miguel reported. "Foundation is reinforced, and we've started on the roof frame." Emma and Lily had been appointed official tool runners and water carriers, their young faces serious with responsibility. Even exhausted, they insisted on helping. "Girls should be sleeping," Mary fretted. "Can't sleep," Emma said firmly. "This is our house, our family. We're staying until it's done." The night took on a dreamlike quality. People who'd never spoken before worked side by side, sharing tools and stories and determination. Mrs. Chen taught Mary a Chinese lullaby while they painted window frames. Miguel's son showed Emma and Lily how to tie knots that would hold under pressure. Big Martha turned out to have a surprisingly good singing voice and led work songs that kept everyone's spirits up. By dawn, the impossible had happened. The roof was complete, the walls finished, and the floors laid. The house wasn't fancy, but it was solid, safe, and undeniably a home. "It's beautiful," Lily breathed, standing in what would be her bedroom. "It's ours," Emma added, and Jacob heard a lifetime of longing in those two simple words. Judge Morrison arrived at exactly 2 o'clock that afternoon, accompanied by Sheriff Coleman and, inevitably, Silas Blackwood. The crowd of volunteers had dispersed to catch up on sleep, but their work spoke for itself. The house stood complete and proud in the afternoon sunlight, with smoke rising from the chimney and curtains in the windows. A small garden plot had been marked out, and someone had even built a swing hanging from the big cottonwood tree. "Impressive," Judge Morrison admitted, testing the stability of the porch railing. "Very impressive indeed." He spent an hour examining every detail, checking the foundation, testing the roof supports, inspecting the interior rooms. Emma and Lily gave him a guided tour, their pride evident in every word. "This is our room," Emma explained, showing off the loft bedroom. "We each get our own side, but we can still talk at night. And this is where we practice our music," Lily added, indicating the small parlor where Jacob's fiddle waited on a stand. Blackwood followed the inspection with growing frustration. There was nothing to criticize. The house was well built, properly furnished, and clearly a labor of love. Finally, Judge Morrison gathered everyone in the main room. "Mr. Harrison, Mrs. Harrison, I've seen enough. This house meets and exceeds all my requirements. The children are clearly well cared for, happy and thriving in your custody." Jacob felt his knees go weak with relief. "Thank you, Your Honor." "However," the judge continued, and Jacob's heart stopped, "I have one final question for Emma and Lily." The girls stepped forward, holding hands. "If Mr. Blackwood's offer still stands traveling, performing for large audiences, seeing the world, would you want to take it?" Emma and Lily looked at each other, having one of their silent twin conversations. Then Emma spoke for both of them. "Thank you, Mr. Blackwood. But we're home now. This is where we belong." Judge Morrison nodded and closed his folder. "Then it's settled. Legal guardianship is granted to Jacob and Mary Harrison. These proceedings are concluded." As the officials prepared to leave, Blackwood approached Jacob one last time. "You've won this round," he said quietly, "but I'll be watching. One mistake, one sign that you can't provide for them properly, and I'll be back." "Then you'll be watching for a long time," Jacob replied, "because these girls are my daughters now, in every way that matters." After they left, the new family stood together on their front porch, looking out over the valley that was now truly their home. "So," Mary said, slipping her arm through Jacob's, "what do we do now?" Jacob picked up his fiddle and started tuning it. "Now we make music, and we live happily ever after." As the first notes drifted across the valley, Emma and Lily began to sing, their voices blending in perfect harmony. The Dakota harmonies were home at last. The gunshot shattered the morning peace like glass breaking against stone, sending birds exploding from the trees around the homestead as Jacob dropped his coffee cup and rushed toward the sound, his heart hammering with terror about what he might find. "Mary!" he shouted, not seeing her anywhere near the house. "Emma! Lily!" "We're here!" came Lily's voice from behind the barn, high and frightened. "Mary's hurt!" Jacob ran around the building to find Mary sitting on the ground, her face pale and her left arm cradled against her body. Emma knelt beside her while Lily stood guard with Jacob's old hunting rifle, the smoking barrel pointing toward the woods. "What happened?" Jacob demanded, dropping to his knees beside his wife. "Someone was watching the house from those trees," Mary said through gritted teeth. "I went to investigate, and they took a shot at me. Bullet grazed my arm. I scared them off," Lily said proudly, though her hands shook on the rifle. "Emma taught me how to load it last week." Jacob felt a mixture of pride and terror that these two young girls had protected Mary while he was doing morning chores. But the larger fear loomed bigger: someone had fired a gun at his family. Did you see who it was? He asked, examining Mary's wound. The bullet had torn through her sleeve and left a bloody groove along her upper arm, but thankfully hadn't hit bone. Too far away, Mary replied. But I found this. She held up a brass button, the kind that belonged on an expensive coat. Jacob had seen buttons exactly like it on Silas Blackwood's jacket. We need to get you to Dr. Henley, Jacob said, helping Mary to her feet. No, Mary said firmly. If word gets out that someone shot at me, people will start asking questions. What if they decide our homestead isn't safe for children? Jacob saw her point, but the thought of treating a gunshot wound himself made his stomach lurch. Mary, you could get infected. Or, it's just a graze, she insisted. Clean it, bandage it, and we'll be fine. But Jacob, we can't let this scare us away from our home. An hour later, Jacob had cleaned and wrapped Mary's arm while Emma and Lily stood watch at the windows. The house felt different now, not like the safe haven they'd built, but like a fort under siege. Maybe we should go into town for a few days, Jacob suggested. Stay at the hotel until… Until what? Mary interrupted. Until Blackwood gets tired of trying to scare us? Until he finds some other way to take the girls? But if he's willing to use violence, then running away won't stop him, Emma said from her post at the front window. He'll just follow us wherever we go. Jacob looked at his family, Mary, with her bandaged arm, Emma and Lily trying to be brave despite their fear, and felt something harden in his chest. They'd worked too hard and come too far to be driven away by a coward with a gun. You're right, he said. We stay, but we take precautions. The rest of the day was spent preparing for trouble. Jacob cleaned his hunting rifle and loaded his pistol, while Mary showed the girls how to bar the doors and windows from inside. They practiced what to do if someone approached the house. Emma would take Lily to the root cellar while Mary got the rifle. This isn't how families should have to live, Mary said that evening as they sat around the kitchen table, weapons within easy reach. No, Jacob agreed, but it's how we have to live until Blackwood gives up or gets caught. What if he doesn't give up? Lily asked in a small voice. Jacob reached across the table to take her hand. Then we'll figure something else out, but we won't let him win. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. Sheriff Coleman rode up to the house alone, his face grim and his hand resting on his gun. Morning, folks, he said, dismounting carefully. Mind if I come in? Of course, Jacob replied, though he noticed Mary had positioned herself near the rifle. Coleman accepted a cup of coffee and sat heavily in their kitchen chair. I'll get straight to the point. Judge Morrison received an anonymous letter yesterday claiming that shots were fired on your property. Jacob and Mary exchanged glances. Someone's been spreading rumors, Jacob said carefully. Maybe. Or maybe someone's trying to stir up trouble. Coleman's eyes were sharp. Funny thing is, the letter was written on expensive paper, the kind you'd find in a fancy hotel. Like where Silas Blackwood is staying, Mary asked. I didn't say that, Coleman replied, but his meaning was clear. Now, I can't arrest a man for writing letters, but I can investigate reports of gunfire. You folks mind if I take a look around? Jacob led the sheriff around the property, pointing out the bullet hole in the barn wall and the spot where Mary had found the brass button. Coleman examined everything with professional thoroughness. Definitely a rifle shot, he concluded. High-powered, fired from those trees about 100 yards out. Whoever did this knew how to shoot. Can you do anything about it? Jacob asked. Not without proof of who pulled the trigger, but I can increase my patrols out this way, maybe ask some questions in town. Coleman's expression hardened. Between you and me, I don't like what's been happening lately. Too many accidents, too many coincidences. After the sheriff left, Jacob felt slightly better knowing they had official support, but that feeling evaporated when Emma came running from the mailbox with a letter that made his blood run cold. What is it? Mary asked, seeing his face. Jacob read the letter aloud. Mr. Harrison, you have something that belongs to me. Continue to resist, and you'll discover that accidents can happen to anyone, anywhere, anytime. There are no safe places for people who stand in my way. It's not signed, Lily observed. Doesn't need to be, Emma said grimly. We all know who sent it. Mary sank into her chair, suddenly looking older than her 25 years. He's not going to stop, is he? Even with legal guardianship, even with the sheriff watching, he's going to keep coming after us. Jacob folded the letter and put it in his pocket. Then maybe it's time we stopped running and started fighting back. What do you mean? Mary asked. I mean, we've been playing defense since this whole thing started. Maybe it's time to go on offense. How? Emma asked, her eyes bright with interest. Jacob thought about everything they'd learned about Blackwood's expensive clothes, his smooth talking, his claims about running a legitimate entertainment business. We do what we do best. We perform. I don't understand, Mary said. Tomorrow night is the harvest dance at the church. Half the territory will be there, including Judge Morrison, Sheriff Coleman, and probably Blackwood himself. Jacob felt a plan forming in his mind. What if we gave them a performance they'll never forget? What kind of performance? Lily asked. Jacob smiled, feeling some of his old confidence returning, the kind that shows everyone exactly what Silas Blackwood really is. Mary looked skeptical. That sounds dangerous. More dangerous than waiting for him to shoot one of us, Jacob countered. We've spent months being afraid. Maybe it's time we made him afraid instead. Emma and Lily looked at each other, having one of their silent conversations. Then Emma grinned with an expression that reminded Jacob powerfully of her sister's mischievous streak. I like it, she said. What's the plan? As Jacob outlined his idea, he watched his family's faces transform from fear to determination. They'd tried hiding, tried running, tried following all the rules. None of it had worked. Tomorrow night, the Dakota Harmonies would take the stage one more time. But this performance wouldn't be about entertaining a crowd. It would be about exposing the truth and fighting for their family's future. The only question was whether they could pull it off before Blackwood realized what they were doing and tried to stop them permanently. But for the first time in weeks, Jacob felt like they were taking control of their own destiny, and that felt better than all the fear in the world. The church bell tolled 7 times as Silas Blackwood walked through the harvest dance crowd like a wolf among sheep, his silver-headed cane tapping against the wooden floor, while Emma and Lily watched him from behind the makeshift stage, their hearts pounding with the knowledge that everything they'd planned was about to unfold. He's here, Emma whispered to Jacob, who was tuning his fiddle in the corner where decorations of corn stalks and pumpkins created shadows deep enough to hide their final preparations. Good, Jacob replied, though his hands trembled slightly on the strings. The more witnesses, the better. The church social hall buzzed with the biggest crowd Deadwood Gulch had seen all year. Families from neighboring ranches, miners from the hills, business owners from Tonevaroon had come to celebrate the harvest and dance to music that would normally be provided by the Dakota Harmonies. But tonight would be different. Tonight, they weren't just entertainers. Mary approached with a basket covered by a checkered cloth, her wounded arm still in a sling but her eyes bright with determination. Everything's ready, she said quietly. Are you sure about this? Jacob looked across the hall at Judge Morrison, who was sampling Mrs. Henderson's apple cider near the refreshment table. Sheriff Coleman stood by the door, his badge glinting in the lamplight. Even Pastor Williams was there, having grudgingly agreed to let them perform despite his concerns about their unconventional family situation. We've tried everything else, Jacob said. Legal proceedings, building a proper home, following every rule they set for us. But Blackwood keeps finding new ways to threaten our family. What if this backfires? Mary asked. What if people don't believe us? Then at least we'll have tried, Emma said, her young voice steady with resolve. At least we'll have fought for ourselves instead of just hoping someone else would protect us. Lily nodded agreement, clutching the piece of sheet music they'd prepared specially for tonight. Mama always said the truth has power, even when people don't want to hear it. Blackwood had positioned himself near the front of the crowd, his expensive suit making him stand out among the farmers and working folk. He nodded politely to Judge Morrison and engaged Sheriff Coleman in friendly conversation, playing the role of a concerned citizen who only wanted what was best for everyone. Ladies and gentlemen, Pastor Williams called out, clapping his hands for attention. Please welcome our evening's entertainment, the Dakota Harmonies. The crowd applauded as Jacob led his family onto the small stage. Emma and Lily wore their best dresses, the blue and yellow ones they'd worn to court, while Mary had chosen a simple green outfit that complemented her red hair. Jacob himself had donned his only good suit, the one he'd married Margaret in years ago. "Thank you all for coming tonight," Jacob said, his voice carrying clearly through the hall. "Before we begin, I'd like to tell you a story." Blackwood's expression shifted slightly, a flicker of suspicion crossing his face. "It's a story about two little girls who lost their parents and found themselves alone in the world," Jacob continued. "They had nothing but each other and the songs their mother taught them." Emma and Lily stepped forward, and Lily began to sing the lullaby their mother had hummed in those final days before sickness took her. Her voice was clear and sweet, filled with memory and loss. Emma joined in harmony, and together they painted a picture of childhood innocence facing an uncertain world. The crowd grew quiet, drawn into the simple beauty of the song. Even Blackwood seemed affected, though his hands gripped his cane more tightly. "These girls," Jacob said as the song ended, "could have been broken by their losses. Instead, they chose to keep singing. They chose to trust a stranger who offered them hope instead of promises." He picked up his fiddle and began playing "Home Sweet Home," but slower than usual, more contemplative. Mary joined with her voice, adding a harmony that spoke of finding belonging after years of searching. "But not everyone believed they deserved a home," Jacob continued, his words weaving between the musical phrases. "Some people thought children should be grateful for whatever scraps adults chose to give them." Blackwood straightened in his chair, clearly understanding that this performance was aimed at him. "Some people," Mary sang, improvising lyrics to the familiar melody, "think power gives them the right to take what others treasure most." Emma stepped forward, her young voice cutting through the evening air like a blade. "Some people hide their greed behind fancy words and false concern." The crowd began to murmur, sensing that something unusual was happening. Judge Morrison leaned forward, his expression thoughtful. Sheriff Coleman's hand moved instinctively toward his badge. Lily joined her sister, their voices blending as they sang. "But children see truth even when adults pretend. We know the difference between love and lies." Blackwood rose from his chair, his face darkening. "This is highly inappropriate," he called out. "These children are being coached to perform personal attacks." "Are they?" Jacob asked, stopping his fiddle. "Or are they simply telling their truth?" "This is supposed to be entertainment, not a public trial," Blackwood protested. "You're right," Emma said, stepping to the edge of the stage. "It's not a trial, because in a trial, the accused gets to defend themselves with evidence." She reached into the basket Mary had brought and pulled out the brass button they'd found after the shooting. "This fell off someone's coat when they were hiding in our woods with a rifle." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Blackwood's hand moved unconsciously to his jacket, where one button was indeed missing. "And this," Lily added, producing the threatening letter, "arrived at our house the day after someone shot at our mother." Sheriff Coleman was already moving through the crowd, his expression grim. "Mr. Blackwood, I think we need to have a conversation." "This is ridiculous," Blackwood sputtered. "Children's fantasies and coincidental evidence. Any lawyer could dismiss." "What about this?" Mary interrupted, pulling out a telegraph message. "A response from Mrs. Jameson in St. Louis, confirming that you tried to buy her lumber to prevent us from finishing our house." The crowd's murmur grew louder, more hostile. These were frontier people who valued honest work and fair dealing above all else. "Or this," Jacob added, producing a letter from the territorial governor's office, confirming that your traveling show license was revoked last year for unsuitable treatment of minor performers. Blackwood's composure finally cracked. "You have no idea what you're dealing with," he snarled. "Those girls have talent that could make them famous, rich, successful. Instead, you're condemning them to a life of mediocrity in this backwater settlement." "Maybe," Emma said calmly, "but it will be our choice." "Children don't get to choose," Blackwood snapped. "Adults make decisions for." "Which adults?" Lily interrupted. "The ones who love us, or the ones who want to use us?" Judge Morrison stood up, his voice carrying absolute authority. "Sheriff Coleman, I believe you have grounds for several charges against Mr. Blackwood." As Coleman approached with handcuffs, Blackwood made one last desperate play. "You'll regret this," he told Jacob. "All of you. I have friends, connections, money. This isn't over." "Yes," Jacob said quietly. "It is." The crowd watched in stunned silence as Sheriff Coleman led Blackwood away. Then, slowly, applause began to build, not the polite clapping of a social gathering, but the genuine appreciation of people who had witnessed courage triumphing over corruption. "Well," Pastor Williams said into his speaking trumpet, "I believe we still have a harvest dance to enjoy. Dakota Harmonies, perhaps you could play something a bit more traditional?" Jacob grinned and raised his fiddle. "How about a waltz?" As the music began and couples started to dance, Emma and Lily found themselves surrounded by well-wishers and supporters. Mrs. Henderson hugged them both, tears in her eyes. Dr. Henley shook Jacob's hand with genuine respect. Even the stern church ladies who had once disapproved of their irregular family now smiled with acceptance. But the best moment came when Judge Morrison approached the stage during a break between songs. "Mr. Harrison," he said formally, "I want to apologize for doubting your fitness as a guardian. What I witnessed tonight, the courage, the planning, the way your family stood together, that's what real parenting looks like." "Thank you, Your Honor," Jacob replied. "But we couldn't have done it alone. This whole community supported us." Judge Morrison nodded. "That's exactly my point. These girls don't just have parents now. They have an entire town looking out for them. That's something no amount of money or influence can provide." As the evening wound down and families began heading home, the Dakota Harmonies packed up their instruments with a sense of completion they'd never felt before. They were no longer fighting for survival or acceptance. They were simply a family, making music together because they loved it. "So what happens now?" Mary asked as they loaded their things into the wagon. Jacob looked at his wife, his daughters, and the friends who had supported them through their darkest hours. "Now we go home," he said, "and we live happily ever after." "Is it really over?" Lily asked. Emma answered for all of them. "The scary part is over. Now comes the good part." As they drove through the moonlit valley toward their homestead, their voices rose in harmony, one more Timino for an audience, but for the pure joy of making music together. The Dakota Harmonies had faced their greatest challenge and emerged victorious, not through violence or legal maneuvering, but through truth, courage, and the unbreakable bonds of family. The song they sang was one Margaret had taught Jacob years ago, about finding peace after storms. It seemed perfect for this moment, this family, this new beginning that felt like coming home. 6 months later, spring sunshine poured through the windows of the expanded homestead as Emma burst through the front door, her school dress muddy and her face glowing with excitement, while Lily and Mary looked up from their sewing circle with expressions of amused curiosity. "Jacob," Emma called, not caring that she was tracking dirt across Mary's freshly mopped floors. "You have to come see this right now." Jacob emerged from his workshop, the small building he'd added behind the house, where he crafted fiddles and taught music lessons to children from neighboring farms, swiping wood shavings from his hands and grinning at Emma's enthusiasm. "What's got you so worked up, little bird?" he asked, using the nickname that had stuck after their court victory. "There's a whole family of people camped by Miller's Creek," Emma announced breathlessly. "They've got a wagon and 3 children, and they're asking about the Dakota Harmonies." Mary set down her needlework, interest piqued. "What kind of family?" "The papa plays guitar, the mama has a beautiful voice, and their children sing like angels," Lily added, having appeared in the doorway with grass stains on her apron. "They heard about us in Rapid City and came all this way just to meet us." Jacob felt a familiar stirring in his chest, the same feeling he'd had when he first heard Emma and Lily singing in that alley behind the Rusty Nail. "Are they in trouble? Do they need help?" "I don't think so," Emma said. "But they want to talk to you about something important. Something about music and families and traveling together." "Traveling?" Mary's eyebrows rose. After everything they'd been through to establish their home, the idea of leaving seemed strange. "Not leaving," Lily clarified quickly. "The papa said something about musicians helping other musicians. Like a..." She searched for the right word. "Like a circuit?" Jacob and Mary exchanged glances, remembering conversations they'd had during the long winter evenings about what their future might hold. They'd built a good life in Deadwood Gulch, but sometimes Jacob wondered if their music could reach beyond their small valley. "Well," Jacob said, hanging up his work apron, "I suppose we should go meet these mysterious musical travelers." The family by Miller's Creek turned out to be the Kowalskis Polish immigrants who had been making their way west, performing in towns along the railroad to earn money for supplies. The father, Stefan, had rough hands and gentle eyes, while his wife Anna possessed the kind of voice that could make grown men weep. Their 3 children ranged from 6 to 12, each one blessed with musical talent. "We heard about the Dakota Harmonies from a conductor in Rapid City," Stefan explained as they sat around a small campfire, sharing coffee and stories. "He told us about a family who stood up to a bad man and won their freedom through music." "It wasn't quite that simple," Jacob said modestly. "Maybe not simple," Anna agreed, "but it was inspiring. You see, we've been traveling for 2 years, never staying anywhere long enough to call it home. The children need stability, but we also need to use our music to survive." Mary poured more coffee for their guests. "What did you have in mind?" "A musical circuit," Stefan said, his eyes brightening. "Groups of performers who travel between established towns, bringing entertainment to places that rarely see it. But instead of one family struggling alone, we work together sharing resources, supporting each other, building something bigger than any of us could manage individually." Emma and Lily had been quietly playing with the Kowalski children, but now they drifted closer to listen to the adult conversation. "How would it work?" Jacob asked, intrigued despite himself. "Each family maintains a home base," Anna explained, "but we coordinate our travels, sometimes performing together, sometimes in smaller groups. Towns get regular entertainment, families get steady income, and children get both stability and adventure." "It sounds wonderful," Mary said, "but we've just gotten settled here. The girls have friends, Jacob has his workshop, and we've worked so hard to build this life." "We wouldn't want you to give that up," Stefan assured her. "That's the beauty of the circuit idea. You keep your home, but you also share your gift with people who need it." Lily tugged on Jacob's sleeve. "Papa, remember what you told us about music being meant to be shared?" Jacob looked down at his daughter, seeing wisdom beyond her years in those amber eyes. "I remember." "Well," Emma added, "maybe there are other families out there like we used to be. Families who need to hear that they're not alone." That evening, the 2 families performed together around the campfire. Stefan's guitar blended perfectly with Jacob's fiddle, while Anna's voice soared above the harmony created by Mary, Emma, and Lily. The Kowalski children added their own parts, creating a sound that was rich and complex and utterly magical. "This could work," Jacob admitted to Mary, as they walked home under a star-filled sky. "Not the traveling all the time, but maybe occasionally?" "You're already thinking about it, aren't you?" Mary teased. "I can see the wheels turning in your head." "Maybe just short trips," Jacob said. "A few days here and there, bringing music to settlements that never get to hear live performances. We could still be home most of the time. And the girls would learn about different places and different people," Mary mused. "That could be good for them." The next morning brought an unexpected test of their new friendship with the Kowalskis. Tommy Henderson came racing out to the homestead with news that a flash flood had washed out the bridge over Miller's Creek, trapping the traveling family on the wrong side with no way to get their wagon across. "Water's running too high and fast," Tommy reported. "Sheriff Coleman says it'll be at least a week before it's safe to cross." Jacob harnessed their strongest horses, while Mary packed food and blankets. Emma and Lily gathered their own belongings, clothes, books, and musical instruments to share with the Kowalski children who had lost some of their possessions in the flood. They spent that week getting to know each other better, and by the time the creek receded, both families knew they'd found something special. The Kowalskis had encountered kindness and generosity that restored their faith in human nature, while the Harrisons had discovered the joy of musical collaboration on a larger scale. "So what do you think?" Stefan asked on their final evening together. "Would you consider joining our circuit? We're planning to visit settlements throughout the Dakota Territory this summer, places that haven't heard live music in years. Jacob looked around at his family, seeing excitement and hope in their faces. They'd fought so hard to establish their home and their place in the community. But maybe home wasn't just a building, maybe it was wherever they were together, sharing their gift with people who needed it. "We'll try it," he decided. "One tour this summer. If it works out, we'll talk about making it a regular arrangement." Emma and Lily whooped with joy, already planning which songs they'd teach the Kowalski children and which new places they'd get to see. "But," Jacob added, "Deadwood Gulch stays our home base. This valley, this community, they gave us our start. We won't forget that." "Nor should you," Anna said warmly. "The best traveling musicians always know where they belong." As the Kowalskis prepared to continue their journey to the next town, promises were made to meet again in July for their first joint tour. The children exchanged addresses and sworn to write letters, while the adults made practical plans about routes and schedules and the logistics of traveling with multiple families. Standing on their front porch, watching the wagon disappear over the hill, Jacob felt a familiar sense of anticipation, not the anxiety of facing unknown threats, but the excitement of new possibilities. "Ready for another adventure?" Mary asked, slipping her hand into his. Jacob looked at Emma and Lily, who were already practicing harmonies with imaginary audiences in mind, then at the valley that had become their sanctuary, and finally at the woman who had chosen to build a life with them despite all the obstacles. "With this family," he said, raising his fiddle to catch the last rays of sunlight, "I'm ready for anything." As evening settled over their homestead, the Dakota Harmonies played one more song, not for any audience except themselves, and the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. It was a song about journeys and homecomings, about finding family in unexpected places, and about the courage to keep singing no matter what challenges life might bring. The music drifted across the valley, carrying with it the promise of new adventures and the certainty that whatever came next, they would face it together. The Dakota Harmonies had learned that home wasn't just a placid, was wherever love lived, wherever music played, and wherever people chose to stand together against the darkness. Their story had begun with two lost children singing in an alley. Now it continued with a family strong enough to share their song with the world, confident in the knowledge that no matter how far they traveled, they would always have each other, and they would always have home. The song ended, but the harmony lingered in the night air, a promise that some music never truly fathers it, just waits for the next voice to join in and carry it forward.